a youth worker in Preston at Preston Minster, and I'm so excited to be here with you. Yeah, I really hope that you've been enjoying looking at James together and all it has to offer and all that we can kind of get from the book. And in this session, we're going to be looking at James 1, verses 2 to 4. And I guess it could be considered a fairly complicated bit of the Bible. I find it really hard to understand. So I hope that as we spend time together, we hang out with each other, we can kind of come to a conclusion, or we can understand it a bit better once we've kind of gone through it together. So let me read it out. It's James 1, 2 to 4, and it says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." So let me read it again. "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." I would love to know, what is your pure joy? When I think of pure joy, I think of being on a beach with a glorious tan, eating loads of olives and crisps, because I'm probably a bit more of a savoury person. Maybe that sounds crazy to you. And listening to some good music. And when I talk about being on a beach, I'm thinking like white sands, turquoise sea, like see-through, that you can see the bottom, which we don't often get in England, which is really sad, but that's my pure joy. Maybe you're thinking, that sounds like a nightmare to me. Maybe your pure joy is like being at a theme park, which is probably my nightmare, or maybe it's writing a song or reading a book or hanging out with friends. Maybe that's what you think of when I ask that question, when you think of your pure joy. Now, I could be making assumptions, I could be jumping to conclusions, but forgive me if I'm wrong. I assume that when I said, what is your pure joy, none of you thought, my pure joy is most definitely when I'm suffering and when I'm going through trials. To me, it sounds like James has lost the plot a little bit when we read that. Maybe he's just, he's gone a bit wild with what he's saying. Or maybe joy is something different. Maybe it's something more than just being on a beach or being on a theme park. Have you ever seen a brand new baby, or maybe you've seen a birth? I remember when I was in high school, in my science lesson, they made us watch, for some reason, I don't know why, they made us watch this poor woman give birth. It was on a video, not in real life, thankfully, but I've definitely been scarred for life from it. So I don't know, maybe you've seen that in your school. Do they do that in science anymore? I don't know. But I remember when my niece Lily was born, and we went to go and visit her in the hospital. She was like a few hours old. She was so new, so tiny, and we went to go and visit her in her hospital. We had presents in our bags, and we had cards from family members and frozen meals that we'd cooked them, because when you've just had a brand new baby, the last thing you want to do is cook. And we walked into the hospital and went into their room, and we saw my brother and sister-in-law, and their faces were just pure joy. They were such proud parents, and they were holding their new little tiny daughter in their arms. Just pure joy written all over their faces, and the emotion of the room was just, you could just feel it as soon as you walked in. However, I'm sure just a few minutes, maybe hours earlier, that room did not look like pure joy. I'm sure it was probably pretty manic, a bit of chaos. I imagine there were like people running in and out. I'm guessing there was probably lots of noise and like things that didn't look very joyous in that moment. But a few minutes later, it was just pure joy. They looked like they were experiencing this joy, even though just a few minutes before this epic event had happened. And it got me thinking, when I experienced that and I saw them, and when I've read through James, yeah, a bit like I said before, maybe joy is something more than just sitting on a beach. I don't know, but let's look into that. So I've been on a bit of a journey to find out what on earth James is going on about, and I would love it if you could come with me and we'll try and like discover it together. I had a look in different places where it talks about joy in the Bible, and there's a few places where it says that if you keep God's commandments, you'll have joy, or when you're in his presence, you'll have joy. And there's lots of like stuff about singing to God in joy, out of joy, because of the salvation that he's given to us. I think, here's a philosophical thought for you. I think joy is more than a good time. But it sounds like it's something that God gives to us, and it sounds like it's something that we can have in any circumstance, no matter what we're going through. I want to suggest that James is saying, consider it pure joy when we go through trials and suffering, because it means that it's an opportunity where we can lean on God and we can mature in him as we spend time in his presence. And so I would love for us to look into perseverance now. We've looked at pure joy. We're going to look into perseverance, which the verse looks at as well. And then we're going to look into some like practical tips that we can take with us for when we're going through trials. So we've looked at pure joy. We're going to look at perseverance. When I was 7 years old, I was diagnosed with something called Perthes disease, and it's where the ball of your hip just like disintegrates. There's no real reason for it, I don't think. It just disintegrates, and the only way that it can heal is that if you're put in plaster, and the plaster usually goes on from the top of your leg to the bottom of your ankle. It's on both legs with a big stick in between. And it was crazy. It was a crazy time. And I remember that my mum used to like shower me. I couldn't get in the shower because you can't get the plaster wet. And so she used to shower me over the bath with like the shower head. But I learnt a few skills during that time. I became very skilled in some things. One of them was doing wheelies in my wheelchair. I became very good at that. Another one was I became very skilled in picking Cocoa Pops out of the plaster. In between like the leg and the plaster, Cocoa Pops would often get trapped there because I'm a big fan of Cocoa Pops. Maybe that's my pure joy, eating Cocoa Pops on a beach. I don't know, but Cocoa Pops would be trapped in the plaster, so I'd have to like get them out. I became very good at that. I also became very good at getting an itch, scratching an itch using a ruler or a knife that was like on my leg, because obviously you can't just itch it when you're wearing plaster, so you'd have to like get the ruler down there and find the itch. So I became very good at locating itches that needed to be scratched on my leg. Maybe you've experienced that as well if you've been in plaster, like getting the ruler down there and giving it a good scratch. Or maybe you're in a wheelchair and you're like the best pro at wheelies. I learned a lot of skills in that time when I was 7 years old. But one thing I really did get skilled in was perseverance. There was nothing I could do but just persevere and get on with it. I would have loved to have said to the doctors when I was getting my plaster changed, you know, don't bother putting it on this time. I'm just gonna go home. I don't want it on anymore. That wasn't really like my decision to make. I just had to get on with it, and it wouldn't have been the best decision because that was the only way that my hip was gonna heal and get better. And so I just had to get on with it and persevere. I'm a bit old school, and there is a band that some of you may have heard of called U2. And I don't know, maybe your parents listen to them or someone that you live with at home. I'd highly recommend them. And there is a song that they sing, I think it's called Yahweh. And the lyric in the song says, "Why the dark before the dawn?" And that is something that I always say to myself, especially when I'm going through hard times. Why the dark before the dawn? And it just gives me a little bit of perspective when I say that. We have all been through such a tough year, and we've all experienced suffering in different ways. Maybe some of us, we've lost people that we love and we weren't able to say goodbye to them. Maybe you've not hugged your family for like over a year, you've not been able to see them. Hopefully you have by now, but maybe that's something that you experienced. Maybe you were really hoping to experience something over the last year and a bit that it just couldn't happen. You weren't able to do that anymore. Maybe your grades, you were really disappointed with them because exams looked slightly different to how they normally do. But I'm sure that through all that, we can look back on our time over the last year and a bit and say that we persevered. And we suffered in ways that we never thought we would. We experienced things maybe that we never even dreamed was possible. Like, who ever imagined going into a lockdown? We've all experienced suffering in so many different ways, but we've persevered through it all. And I don't believe that God sent this suffering. I don't believe that He sends suffering. I don't think that He looks on us and says, these people need to learn, they need to be taught perseverance. So I'm going to send loads of suffering in their lives so that they learn how to persevere. I don't think that that's what God's like. I don't think that that's what happens. And maybe you might want to talk to your youth worker or someone that you trust, someone in your youth group. If you've got questions about suffering, maybe they're the best people for you to talk to. But yeah, I don't think that's what's happened. But what God does do is that He promises that He will use the rubbish, the horrible stuff, the suffering that we go through for His good and for the good of us, for the good of those that love Him. So when James says, "Consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance," what he's saying is that trials get us skilled in perseverance, which comes as we spend time with God in His presence. And according to the writers in the Bible and to James, being in God's presence and leaning on Him is pure joy. So I would love it if we could look at three practical tips that when we go through trials, that we can maybe consider it pure joy. Often, I don't know about you, but for me, whenever I go through something really difficult, my first response is to get super angry with God and to blame it on Him, and maybe I ignore Him or just shout at Him for a long time. Maybe that's like you. But I want to challenge us to, instead of turning away from God, to turn to Him and lean on Him, which I think is what James is saying. Maybe for our first reaction, not to be one of like anger and frustration at God because He hasn't sent these things to make us suffer, but to lean on Him and ask Him for His help as we go through these things, as we go through trials. The second tip is to ask God for joy, and we've seen through this and through the Bible that joy is a gift, and it says in the Bible that it's a spiritual gift and that it's given to us by God. And so we can ask God for this gift of joy. It doesn't mean, I think when I think of joy, I think of a particular person maybe that's like very good at just being joyful no matter what. Or when I think of joy, I think of it being an emotion that we experience when good things happen to us. But it sounds like joy is a gift, and it's something that we can experience no matter what we go through. So we can ask God when we're going through trials for his joy, and we can take that gift from him. And the third tip is to remind ourselves what he says to us, what he says over us, what he says about us when we're going through trials. So there's loads of stuff in the Bible. Maybe you want to look through it and have a look at what God says about us as his children. And there's things like we're loved, we're chosen, we're forgiven, he's got a purpose for us. And maybe you want to write those things down and stick them on your wall. Maybe you, I know there's some people that wake up in the morning. I would love to be this proactive, but there's some people, maybe this is you wake up in the morning and you have a mantra that you say each morning, and it just like declares truths over yourself. Because often with suffering, we start to believe lies about us or about the world around us or about God, maybe because of trauma we've experienced or what we've seen or what we've been through or what we've done to ourselves. And so it's really good to remind ourselves of the truth of what God says over us. So maybe you want to make a mantra that you say every morning or every evening, and it's like you just say truths over yourself, like I'm chosen, I'm loved, and just remind yourself of who you are and who God says you are. So I would love it if we could pray together. I hope that was really helpful. Yeah, let me pray. Father, thank you so much that you can give us joy in any circumstance. And Lord, we pray that that for those of us that really need your joy at the minute, that you'll just give that gift to us now. And I pray for those of us that are really suffering, are really facing difficult trials and difficult times. Lord, I pray that you'll help us to lean on you and help us to become aware of when you're with us and your spirit and where you're guiding us. Yeah, thank you, Father, that you go with us through all of this stuff, through all the horrible stuff, Lord, and that you promise that when we go through trials and suffering, that you're there with us. And I'm reminded of that song by Hillsong, There's Another in the Fire. I don't know if you sing it, check it out. But yeah, it's all about how God goes with us through those trials, and there's always another in the fire. Amen. So yeah, thanks so much for hanging out with me. I hope that you found that really helpful, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the stuff that you're going to be looking at in James. I can't wait to hang out with you soon, and hope that you have a lovely rest of your week.